In my previous life, my fiancée Allison Fox faked her death 3 days before our wedding, leaving me to believe I had lost the love of my life forever. For 10 agonizing years, I mourned her, struggled with crushing debt from our wedding preparations, and barely survived working multiple jobs just to pay off the loans her death had left me with. Then one day, while delivering groceries to survive, I saw her stepping out of a luxury car, laughing with another man, wearing an engagement ring that wasn't mine. She looked exactly the same, not a day older, while I had aged decades from the pain and poverty she had inflicted on me. When she spotted me, she actually smiled and tossed me a $20 bill like I was some beggar, thanking me for being such a devoted fiancé all those years ago. The shock and rage of realizing her betrayal killed me on the spot. But when I opened my eyes, I was back to 3 days before our wedding, the day she would fake her death. This time, I wouldn't just discover her deception. I would make sure her fake death became permanent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days before what should have been the happiest day of my life, I received a phone call that shattered my world forever. Dr. Harrison, the emergency room physician at Westfield General Hospital, delivered the news with professional sympathy that couldn't mask the tragedy of his words. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry to inform you that your fiancée, Allison Fox, was involved in a severe hiking accident at Eagles Peak. Despite our best efforts, she suffered massive internal trauma and didn't survive. 11:47 p.m. The phone slipped from my trembling hands, clattering onto the marble floor of our shared apartment in downtown Millbrook. The sound echoed through the space we had carefully decorated together. Past the wedding dress hanging in pristine white in our bedroom, past the boxes of wedding favors we had spent weeks assembling, past the life we were supposed to build together. Starting in just 72 hours, Allison Fox had been everything to me. We met during our final year at Millbrook University, where she was studying art therapy, and I was finishing my degree in civil engineering. She was vibrant, compassionate, and had this infectious laugh that could light up any room. When she agreed to marry me after 3 years of dating, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Our engagement had been a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Allison insisted on the most elaborate wedding at the prestigious Grandshire estate, complete with 150 guests, a full orchestra, and flowers imported from 3 different countries. The cost was astronomical, nearly $200,000, but I didn't care. I had taken out substantial loans, mortgaged my inheritance from my grandfather's construction business, and even borrowed against my future earnings. Allison deserved the wedding of her dreams, and I was determined to give it to her. The accident, as Dr. Harrison explained it, occurred while Allison was on what she called a pre-wedding spiritual retreat, a solo hiking trip to clear her mind before our big day. She had left that morning with her hiking gear and a bright smile, kissing me goodbye and promising to return with perfect clarity and excitement for our future. Instead, she had apparently taken a wrong turn on the Eagles Peak trail system, fallen down a ravine during a sudden rainstorm, and by the time other hikers found her, it was too late. The rescue team had to use specialized equipment to retrieve her body from the rocky terrain below. Standing in that hospital morgue, staring at the covered form that was supposed to be my beloved Allison, something felt wrong. But grief, I told myself, makes everything feel wrong. The woman I loved was gone, and my mind was simply refusing to accept the reality. The funeral arrangements became a nightmare of logistics and crushing financial pressure. Allison's parents, Robert and Patricia Fox, were wealthy socialites from the prestigious Elmwood district, but they were also cold and calculating people who had never approved of their daughter marrying someone they considered beneath her station. They took control of the funeral arrangements immediately, organizing an elaborate service at St. Augustine Cathedral that cost another $50,000. Money I didn't have, but felt obligated to provide as her fiancée. She would have wanted the very best, Patricia Fox informed me with icy authority, her diamond earrings catching the light as she spoke. Allison had refined tastes, as you well know. We simply cannot have a bargain basement send-off for someone of her caliber. The wedding vendors were another financial catastrophe. The contracts I had signed were ironclad, with no provisions for cancellation due to death. The Granshire estate still demanded payment for the venue. The caterers, the florists, the musicians. Everyone wanted their money, regardless of the circumstances. Some showed sympathy. Others showed only their invoice totals. Within a month of Allison's death, I found myself drowning in over $300,000 of debt. The interest payments alone consumed most of my engineering salary. Was forced to sell my grandfather's construction business, the family legacy I had planned to expand after the wedding, just to keep the creditors from taking legal action. The grief was suffocating, but the financial pressure was relentless. I moved from our beautiful downtown apartment to a rundown studio in the industrial part of Millbrook, near the old textile factories that had been abandoned for decades. The neighborhood smelled of rust and desperation, a fitting backdrop for my new reality. Work became my only escape. I threw myself into engineering projects with manic intensity, taking on extra assignments and working weekends to maximize my income. But no matter how hard I worked, the debt seemed to grow rather than shrink. The compound interest was eating me alive, and the various loan companies seemed to delight in adding fees and penalties whenever possible. Years passed in a blur of exhaustion and financial struggle. I aged rapidly under the stress, developing gray hair in my 30s and deep lines around my eyes that made me look decades older than my actual age. The other engineers at my firm began to treat me with a mixture of pity and discomfort, as if my tragedy might be contagious. Dr. Evelyn Cross, the grief counselor the hospital had recommended, tried to help me process what she called complicated grief. During our sessions, in her dimly lit office overlooking Millbrook's Central Park, she would nod sympathetically as I described the financial pressures that seemed to dishonor Allison's memory. Grief isn't just emotional, Leo, she would remind me. It's practical, it's financial, it's social. You're carrying the weight of a life that was planned but never lived. That's an enormous burden for anyone. But even Dr. Cross couldn't have prepared me for what happened in the 10th year after Allison's death. I had finally managed to secure a better-paying position as a senior engineer with Morrison & Associates, a prestigious firm that specialized in large-scale commercial projects. The salary increase meant I could finally start making real progress on my debt. And for the first time in a decade, I began to feel like I might eventually escape the financial prison that Allison's death had created. That optimism lasted exactly 3 weeks. I was making a routine grocery delivery, a side job I had maintained even after the promotion, because every extra dollar mattered to one of Millbrook's most exclusive neighborhoods, the Silver Pine Hills area where houses started at $2 million. As I carried bags of organic produce toward a massive contemporary mansion, a sleek black Tesla pulled into the circular driveway. The woman who stepped out of the driver's seat was wearing a flowing white dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and when she turned toward me, the world stopped spinning. It was Allison Fox, not someone who looked like her, not a distant relative or coincidental resemblance. It was unmistakably, impossibly, Allison Fox, my supposedly dead fiancé. Looking exactly as beautiful and vibrant as she had 10 years ago, she was laughing at something the man beside her had said. A tall, distinguished gentleman with silver hair and an expensive suit that screamed old money. On her left hand, a diamond engagement ring caught the light, a ring that was easily 3 times the size of the one I had given her a decade ago. For a moment, we locked eyes across the manicured lawn. I expected shock, guilt, some kind of human reaction to seeing the fiancée supposedly died on. Instead, Allison Fox smiled. It was the same radiant smile that had made me fall in love with her, but now it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. She approached me with casual confidence, her heels clicking on the stone pathway. The man, obviously her new fiancé, stayed by the car, checking his phone with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to wealth. "Leo Sterling," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered it. "My goodness, you look like you've had a hard decade." I stood there, grocery bags trembling in my hands, unable to form words. She was real. She was alive. She was wealthy and happy and engaged to someone else while I had spent 10 years mourning her death and paying for her funeral. I have to say, Allison continued, reaching into her purse, I'm impressed by your dedication all these years. Really, Leo? The grieving fiancé routine was quite touching. She pulled out a crisp $20 bill and held it toward me. For your service. And thank you for being such a devoted fiancé all those years ago. It really helped sell the whole tragic story. The casual cruelty of her words. It's the way she offered me money like I was just another service worker. The complete lack of remorse or explanation. It all hit me at once. My chest began to tighten, and I felt a sharp pain radiating down my left arm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I managed to gasp, but the words wouldn't come. The grocery bags fell from my hands, spilling expensive organic produce across the pristine driveway. Allison laughed, the same infectious laugh I had once loved. Now, sounding like breaking glass. Oh, Leo, don't be so dramatic. It's not like you didn't get something out of it, too. You got to play the tragic hero for a whole decade? It must have been worth something. The pain in my chest intensified, and I realized with growing horror that I was having a heart attack. 10 years of stress, financial pressure, and grief had finally caught up with me. And the shock of seeing Allison alive and cruel was more than my damaged heart could handle as I collapsed onto the cold stone. My last coherent thought was wondering how many other lies she had told, how long she had been planning this betrayal, and how completely she had destroyed my life for what appeared to be nothing more than an upgrade to a wealthier man. The world went dark as Allison and her new fiancé drove away, leaving me dying on the driveway like discarded trash. Darkness, complete. Suffocating darkness that felt like drowning in an ocean of regret and unanswered questions. I floated in that void for what felt like eternity, replaying every moment of my relationship with Allison Fox, searching for signs I should have seen, warnings I should have heeded. Then, suddenly, light exploded across my consciousness like a supernova. I jolted awake, gasping for air, my heart pounding against my ribs. But instead of the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room or the final darkness of death, I found myself staring at a ceiling I recognized with shocking intimacy, the vintage tin ceiling of our old apartment in downtown Millbrook, the one Allison and I had shared before her supposed death. Panic seized me as I sat up in bed, looking around a room that should no longer exist. The furniture was exactly as I remembered it from a decade ago. The antique oak dresser Allison had insisted on buying from that expensive vintage store. The full-length mirror where she used to practice her poses for our engagement photos. The window overlooking Millbrook's historic district where morning light filtered through sheer curtains she had spent hours selecting. On the nightstand beside me, my phone displayed a date that made my blood run cold. October 15th, 3 days before our wedding. It's the exact day that Allison would leave for her spiritual retreat and supposedly fall to her death at Eagles Peak. I stumbled to the bathroom, desperate to understand what was happening to me. The face staring back from the mirror wasn't the weathered, prematurely aged man who had been delivering groceries just moments before. This was my 28-year-old face, unmarked by a decade of stress and financial hardship. My hands were smooth, without the calluses from years of extra manual labor. My hair was thick and brown, not the gray-streaked remnant I had grown accustomed to seeing. Had it all been a dream, the most vivid, emotionally devastating nightmare imaginable? But no, the memories were too detailed, too consistent, too painfully real. I could recall specific conversations with creditors, exact dollar amounts on collection notices. The precise layout of that miserable studio apartment near the textile factories. I remembered Dr. Cross's office down to the pattern on her curtains, the taste of the cheap coffee I drank during my delivery jobs. The sound of Allison's cruel laughter echoing across that pristine driveway in Silver Pine Hills. Somehow, possibly, I had been given a second chance. Whether it was divine intervention, cosmic justice, or something even stranger, I was back at the moment before everything went wrong. Back when I still believed Allison Fox loved me. Back when I still trusted her completely. But this time, knew the truth. I walked through our apartment like a ghost haunting his own past, touching objects that carried new significance now that I understood what was coming. The wedding dress hanging in our closet wasn't a symbol of our future happiness. It was a prop in an elaborate deception. The boxes of wedding favors weren't tokens of our love. They were evidence of how thoroughly she had manipulated me into financial ruin. In the kitchen, I found Allison's hiking gear laid out on the counter exactly as she would have prepared it for her spiritual retreat. The backpack, the climbing equipment, the detailed map of Eagle's Peak with a route, carefully marked in red ink. In my previous life, I had seen these items as proof of her adventurous spirit, her desire to enter our marriage with a clear and centered mind. Now I recognized them for what they really were, stage props for an elaborate fake death scenario. I picked up the map, studying the marked route with new understanding. The path she had drawn didn't lead to any of the dangerous ravines where her accident supposedly occurred. Instead, it led to a remote parking area on the far side of the mountain, accessible by a back road that connected to the state highway system. The perfect place for someone to disappear without a trace. The phone rang, startling me from my analysis. The caller ID showed Allison Mobile, a call I remembered receiving at exactly this time in my previous life. "Good morning, my love." Her familiar voice sang through the speaker, warm and affectionate in a way that now made my skin crawl. "I'm just leaving the spa after my final pre-wedding massage. I feel absolutely radiant, Leo. Tomorrow is going to be perfect." Tomorrow. She was referring to her planned departure for the spiritual retreat, the beginning of her elaborate disappearance. In my previous life, I had interpreted her excitement as anticipation for our wedding. Now I heard it for what it really was, anticipation for her escape. "I can't wait to see you tonight," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "We should talk about the final preparations." "Oh, darling, you worry too much about the details," Allison laughed. "Everything is going to work out exactly as it's supposed to. Trust me on that." The casual confidence in her voice was chilling. She had already made her decision, already planned my destruction. And she was enjoying the performance after hanging up. I spent the rest of the morning exploring our apartment with forensic attention, looking for evidence I had missed the first time around. In Allison's jewelry box, hidden beneath a false bottom, I discovered by accident. I found documents that made my blood boil. There was a birth certificate for Amanda Foster, complete with Allison's photograph, but a different name, and birth date. There was a passport in the same false identity, and most damning of all, there was a bank account statement showing a balance of over $800,000. Money that had been systematically transferred from our joint wedding account. Over the past 6 months, she hadn't just planned to fake her death. She had been stealing from me for months, building a nest egg for her new life while I accumulated debt to pay for our wedding. But the most revealing document was a handwritten letter, apparently a draft of something she never intended to send. "My dearest Victor, the plan is proceeding perfectly. Leo suspects nothing, and by next week, I'll be free to start our life together. The poor fool has taken out loans for everything: the venue, the flowers. Even my funeral expenses will be his responsibility. Estimate he'll be paying for our love story for at least a decade. I can't wait to leave this boring little life behind and become the woman you deserve. Someone who appreciates real wealth, real sophistication, real passion. Forever yours, a Victor." Her new fiancé's name was Victor, and from the tone of the letter, their relationship had been going on for quite some time before her supposed DEATHI photographed every document with trembling hands, my mind racing with possibilities. In my previous life, I had been a victim of Allison's cruelty because I was naive and trusting, but now I had something she couldn't account for: complete knowledge of her plan, combined with the wisdom that comes from having lived through the consequences. She wanted to fake her death to escape our marriage and leave me with the financial ruins of our relationship. She wanted to disappear and start a new life with her wealthy lover while I struggled for years to pay for the privilege of being betrayed. But if Allison Fox wanted to be dead so badly, I decided I would be happy to help her achieve that goal permanently. The afternoon brought a flood of memories about the timeline of her deception. I remembered exactly when she would leave for her retreat, exactly which route she would take, exactly where her accident would supposedly occur. More importantly, I remembered the specific details of how her death had been staged. Information that would be crucial for what I was planning. As evening approached, I felt a cold calm settling over me. Allison would return home, expecting to spend one final night with her unsuspecting fiancé before disappearing forever. She would probably put on a performance of loving affection, maybe even suggest we make love one last time for good luck before the wedding. But this time, I would be the one performing. This time, I would be the one with a secret plan. When I heard her key in the lock, I arranged myself on the sofa with a glass of wine and what I hoped was a convincing smile. The last chapter of Allison Fox's deception was about to begin, but she had no idea that this time the story would have a very different ending. Allison swept through the door like a goddess returning from Mount Olympus, her arms laden with shopping bags from Millbrook's most exclusive boutiques. She wore a flowing emerald dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her golden hair caught the evening light streaming through our apartment windows. To anyone else, she would have looked like the perfect bride-to-be, radiant with happiness and anticipation. But now I could see through the performance. Every gesture, every smile, every carefully chosen word was part of an elaborate act designed to maintain the illusion until the moment of her escape. "Leo, darling," she exclaimed, dropping her bags and rushing to embrace me. Her kiss was passionate and convincing, the kind of kiss that had once made me weak in the knees. Now it felt like a snake's bite, venomous and calculating. I've had the most wonderful day. I bought a few last-minute things for our honeymoon, and I visited Dr. Martinez for my final checkup before the wedding. Everything is absolutely perfect. Martinez. I remembered that name from my previous life, though at the time I hadn't thought to question why Allison needed a special checkup before our wedding. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and the documents I had discovered, I realized Dr. Martinez was probably the physician who would later provide the false medical records supporting her staged death. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her close and breathing in the expensive perfume she wore. "I've been thinking about our future all day. It's about how much our life is going to change after tomorrow." Allison's eyes sparkled with what I now recognized as barely contained excitement about her escape plan. "Oh, Leo, you have no idea how much. Everything is going to change. This time tomorrow, I'll be a completely different person." The double meaning in her words was so obvious now that I marveled at how completely I had missed it the first time around. She was practically confessing her deception, secure in the knowledge that I was too trusting and naive to understand what she really meant as she unpacked her shopping bags. I observed her with the analytical eye of someone who had lived through the consequences of every lie she was telling. The honeymoon clothes she showed me were actually a carefully curated wardrobe for her new identity. The sexy lingerie wasn't for our wedding night, it was for her reunion with Victor after her successful death. "I have something special planned for tonight," she said, pulling out a bottle of expensive champagne. "I want us to toast to our future, to celebrate the end of one chapter and the beginning of another." In my previous life, I had interpreted this as romantic sentiment. I understood it as a private joke at my expense. She was literally toasting the end of our relationship and the beginning of her new life with another man. But I played my part perfectly, accepting the champagne with what I hoped was convincing enthusiasm. "To our future," I agreed, clinking my glass against hers, to getting exactly what we both deserve. Allison's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, as if some subconscious part of her brain had detected the subtle threat in my words. But she recovered quickly, draining her champagne glass with practiced elegance. "I should start packing for my retreat," she announced, moving toward the bedroom. "I want to leave early tomorrow morning, while the light is perfect for hiking. There's supposed to be a beautiful sunrise at Eagle's Peak." I followed her, watching as she carefully selected. items for her backpack. Every choice was deliberate and strategic. She packed lightweight clothing that could be easily discarded, emergency supplies that suggested a longer journey than a simple day hike, and most tellingly, she included the false identification documents I had discovered earlier. I said casually, sitting on the edge of our bed. I've been thinking about Eagles Peak. Isn't that where that hiker disappeared last year? It's the one they never found? Allison's hands paused in their packing. For just a moment, was there? I don't really follow those kinds of stories. They're so depressing. But I remembered that story well now, because in my previous life, after Allison's supposed death, I had researched every hiking accident in the area. The missing hiker, a woman named Catherine Wells, had been found 6 months later, living under a false identity in another state. She had staged her own disappearance to escape an abusive marriage and crushing debt. It was, I realize now, probably where Allison had gotten the idea for her own fake death scheme. I'm just worried about you being out there alone, I continued, letting genuine concern creep into my voice. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back to me safely. Allison came over and sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. Her touch was warm and familiar, and for a moment I almost forgot that everything about her was a lie. Leo, my love, she said softly, looking directly into my eyes with what appeared to be deep sincerity. I promise you that after tomorrow you'll never have to worry about me again. I'll be exactly where I'm supposed to be, and you'll be free to live the life you're meant to live. Again, the double meaning was staggering. She was literally telling me that she would disappear and that I would be left to deal with the consequences alone. But she was phrasing it as if she was being selfless and romantic. What if something happens to you out there? Pressed partly to test her reaction, and partly because I needed to understand the exact details of her plan. What if you get hurt and can't call for help? Oh, darling, you worry too much, she laughed, but I caught a brief flash of something calculating in her eyes. I've been planning this trip for months. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I have contingencies in place. Dr. Martinez gave me emergency contacts, people who know the area well and can help if anything goes wrong. Emergency contacts. More likely, Dr. Martinez had given her contacts for people who would help stage her accident and provide the false death certificate. As the evening progressed, Allison's performance became even more elaborate. She suggested we order dinner from Romano's, the expensive Italian restaurant where we had our first date. She put on music, the same playlist we had danced to during our engagement party. She even brought out a photo album, flipping through pictures of our relationship and making wistful comments about how far we've come together. It was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, designed to create one final beautiful memory that would make her loss even more devastating. In my previous life, I had treasured that evening as our last perfect moment together. Now I could see it for what it really was, a sadistic farewell performance by someone who took pleasure in the depth of the betrayal she was orchestrating. But the most revealing moment came, near midnight, when Allison thought I was asleep. I lay still in our bed, controlling my breathing and keeping my eyes closed. While she quietly got up and moved to her laptop, through barely open eyes, I watched her type what appeared to be an email. The screen was angled away from me, but I could hear the soft clicking of keys and see the blue glow reflecting off her face. After about 10 minutes, she closed the laptop and slipped back into bed, wrapping her arms around me with apparent affection. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I quickly checked her laptop. The email she had sent was in her sent folder addressed to someone named v.prescott at prescottprivate.com. Everything is proceeding as planned. The show begins tomorrow morning at sunrise. By sunset, Amanda Foster will be ready to start her new life. I love you, and I can't wait to be free. V. Prescott. Victor Prescott is her wealthy lover who was waiting for her to complete her elaborate fake death scheme. But I also noticed something else in her email history that made my blood run cold. There were dozens of emails between Allison and Victor, dating back over 2 years, nearly the entire length of our engagement. She had been planning this betrayal almost from the moment she agreed to marry me. Some of the emails were passionate love letters. Others were detailed discussions of how to execute the fake death plan, and the most disturbing ones were casual. Conversations about how naive and trusting I was, how easy it would be to manipulate me into taking on massive debt, and how amusing they found my complete devotion to someone who was planning to destroy me, in one particularly cruel exchange. Victor had suggested that Allison should milk the grieving fiancé angle for as long as possible, maybe even show up at the funeral to watch me suffer. Allison had replied that watching me cry over her empty coffin would be the perfect ending to a perfect performance. These people weren't just planning to betray me, they were planning to enjoy my suffering. As entertainment. But what they hadn't planned for was that their victim would have complete advanced knowledge of their scheme. Combined with the cold determination that comes from having already lived through the consequences of their cruelty, as I closed the laptop and prepared for the final day of Allison Fox's deception, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. She wanted to stage her own death to escape our marriage and leave me to suffer the consequences. She wanted to disappear and start a new life, while I struggled to pay for the privilege of being betrayed. But Allison Fox had made one crucial miscalculation. She had assumed that her victim would remain naive and powerless. She had never considered the possibility that her prey might become the predator in a few hours. She would leave for Eagle's Peak to stage her elaborate accident. She would expect to emerge as Amanda Foster, free to live a life of luxury with Victor Prescott, while Leo Sterling spent the next decade paying for her funeral instead. She was about to discover that some performances have unexpected endings, and some deaths are more permanent than others. The morning of Allison's planned disappearance dawned crisp and clear. With the kind of golden autumn light that photographers dream about, from our bedroom window, I could see Eagle's Peak rising. In the distance, its rocky summit catching the early sunshine like a crown of amber. It was, I had to admit, a perfect day for staging a tragic hiking accident. Allison was already awake when I opened my eyes, sitting at her vanity mirror and applying what she probably thought of as her final performance makeup. She had chosen a natural look, subtle foundation, just a touch of mascara. The kind of minimal cosmetics that would photograph well in what I assumed would be final photos before her supposed accident. "Good morning, my love," she said, catching my reflection in her mirror. "I slept so peacefully last night. I think it's because I feel so resolved about everything. Like all the pieces of my life are finally falling into place." The casual cruelty of her word choice was breathtaking. She was describing the completion of her elaborate betrayal as if it were spiritual enlightenment. "I made coffee," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen, "and I packed some extra snacks for your hike. Trail mix, energy bars, that granola you like. I want to make sure you have everything you need." What I didn't tell her was that the extra snacks included a GPS tracker, disguised as a standard energy bar wrapper, but containing a device small enough to be undetectable unless someone was specifically looking for it. I had purchased it online months earlier in my previous life. Paranoia about Allison's frequent unexplained absences had led me to consider tracking her movements. Though I had ultimately been too trusting to follow through, this time I would know exactly where she went and what she did. Allison accepted the packed snacks with apparent gratitude, giving me a lingering kiss that tasted of coffee and deception. "You take such good care of me, Leo. I hope you know how much that means." Again, the double meaning was obvious now that I knew what to listen for. She was thanking me for being the perfect mark, the ideal victim who would finance his own destruction. After breakfast, I helped her load her hiking gear into her car, a silver Honda Civic that she had chosen specifically because it was common and unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that wouldn't draw attention at remote trailheads. As she did her final equipment check, I made careful mental notes of everything she was taking. The backpack contained enough supplies for several days, not just a single-day hike. The climbing gear was professional grade, suggesting she planned to navigate terrain that required technical skills. Most telling of all, she had packed a small cooler with ice packs, ostensibly for keeping water cold. But I suspected it was actually intended to preserve something that would need to appear. Fresh for a medical examination? I should be back by evening, she said, kissing me goodbye with apparent reluctance. But don't worry if I'm a little late. I want to stay for the sunset, if the weather holds. There's supposed to be incredible views from the summit. I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent and marveling at how completely she had fooled me the first time around. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come home to me. Leo, she whispered against my ear. I promise you that by tonight, everything will be exactly as it should be. I watched her drive away, waiting until her car disappeared around the corner before putting my own plan into motion. I had spent the previous evening preparing for this moment, using my previous life's knowledge to anticipate every aspect of her deception. The first step was establishing my own alibi. I drove to Morrison & Associates and made a point of being seen by several colleagues discussing a project deadline that would keep me busy all day. I sent emails with timestamp evidence, made phone calls that would be logged by the company's system, and generally created an ironclad record of my whereabouts. Then I left work through the back exit, retrieved a motorcycle I had rented under a false name, began following the GPS signal from the tracker I had hidden in Allison's snacks. The route she took was exactly what I had expected based on my analysis of her planning materials. Instead of heading directly to Eagles Peak, she first drove to a remote gas station near the state border, where she met with a man I didn't recognize, a tall, thin individual wearing medical scrubs under a civilian jacket. Through binoculars, I watched them have an animated conversation over coffee, with the man handing Allison what appeared to be medical documents. This was almost certainly Dr. Martinez or one of his associates, providing the false death certificate and other paperwork that would support her staged accident. After their meeting, Allison drove to a storage facility in an industrial part of town I had never seen before. She used a key to access unit number 247, emerging 10 minutes later with a different backpack and what looked like a small medical cooler. The original backpack, the one I had helped her load that morning, was left behind in the storage unit. The implications were staggering. She had been preparing for this deception for months, possibly years, gradually accumulating the props and documentation she would need to stage a convincing death. The medical cooler probably contained blood samples or tissue that would be discovered at the accident site, while the new backpack likely held supplies for her journey to her new identity. From the storage facility, she drove toward Eagles Peak, but instead of taking the main trail access road, she followed a series of increasingly remote paths that eventually led to the backside of the mountain. I had to abandon the motorcycle and continue on foot, using the GPS tracker to follow her movements through terrain that was clearly familiar to her. She parked in a secluded area that was invisible from the main hiking trails, then began what appeared to be a well-rehearsed performance. Using her phone, she took several selfie photos at various locations, creating a digital trail that would suggest she had been hiking alone all day. She staged evidence of her route, leaving footprints and small personal items at strategic locations. But the most elaborate part of her performance took place at a rocky outcropping that overlooked a deep ravine. Here, she opened the medical cooler and began what I can only describe as crime scene staging. She scattered blood, whether real or synthetic. I couldn't tell from my concealed position on the rocks, tore pieces of her hiking clothes and left them snagged on sharp edges, and used climbing equipment to create marks that would suggest a fall. She even went so far as to throw one of her hiking boots into the ravine, presumably so it would be discovered by search teams as evidence of her accident. The attention to detail was remarkable. She was creating a crime scene that would convince experienced search and rescue professionals, medical examiners, and law enforcement officers. This wasn't the desperate improvisation of someone making a last-minute escape. This was the work of someone who had studied every aspect of staged death scenarios. But then came the most revealing part of her performance. After completing her accident scene, Allison hiked to a different part of the mountain, where another vehicle was waiting, a black SUV with tinted windows. The driver was someone I couldn't see clearly, but based on the expensive vehicle and the way Allison ran to embrace whoever was inside, I suspected it was Victor Prescott himself. She had literally staged her own death scene and then walked away to start her new life. leaving behind enough evidence to convince the authorities that Leo Sterling's fiancée had tragically died in a hiking accident in my previous life. The search and rescue team had found the evidence she planted. The medical examiner had been fooled by the staged blood and tissue samples, and I had been left to mourn a death that never actually occurred. But this time, I had documented everything. I had photos of her meeting with the medical professional, videos of her staging the accident scene, and GPS tracking data that proved she had left the mountain alive and uninjured. More importantly, I had a plan that would turn her elaborate deception against her. As I watched the black SUV disappear down the remote mountain road, I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Allison Fox wanted to be dead so badly that she had spent months planning her own funeral. She had manipulated me into taking on crushing debt to pay for a wedding and funeral for someone who was very much alive. But if she wanted to be dead so badly, I was prepared to help her achieve that goal in a much more permanent way than she had originally planned. The final phase of my plan would require precise timing and careful execution. But I had something. Allison couldn't account for a complete knowledge of her deception. Combined with the moral authority that comes from being the victim of elaborate cruelty, by the time the sun set over Eagle's Peak that evening, there would indeed be a death on the mountain. But it wouldn't be the staged performance that Allison had orchestrated. It would be real. It would be final, and it would be justice. The GPS tracker led me to an abandoned ranger station 15 miles from Eagle's Peak. Through binoculars, watched Allison and Victor celebrate their successful deception. Laughing over champagne as they reviewed photos of her staged accident scene, Victor Prescott was exactly what I expected: distinguished, wealthy, arrogant. They embraced passionately, completely unaware they were being watched by the man they had just destroyed. I circled the building silently, dousing the exterior walls with gasoline while they planned their new life inside. Then I called Victor's phone. "This is Leo Sterling," I said calmly. "Believe you know who I am." Through the window, I watched them freeze in terror. Allison grabbed Victor's arm, her face pale with sudden understanding. "I'm completing the plan that Allison started," I continued. "She wanted to fake her death to escape our marriage. But I've decided to help her make that death real." I fired a warning shot through the window, shattering glass and sending them diving for cover. "Come outside with your hands visible. You have 10 seconds. They emerged trembling, Victor trying to shield Allison with his body. In the harsh sunlight, they looked exactly like what they were: criminals caught in the act. "Leo, please," Allison begged, tears streaming down her face. "Let me explain. We can fix this." "I understand perfectly," I replied, keeping my weapon trained on them. "You've spent 2 years planning to fake your death, leave me with crushing debt, and disappear with your wealthy lover. You staged an elaborate accident scene and were planning to watch me suffer while you lived in luxury. We can work something out," Victor stammered. "Financial compensation. This doesn't have to end badly." "You're right," I agreed. "It doesn't have to end badly for anyone, except for you two." I forced them back into the gasoline-soaked building. "Allison wanted to disappear permanently," I explained. "So I'm going to help her achieve that goal." "I'm sorry, Leo," Allison sobbed. "I never meant for it to go this far. You deserve to die, not for making terrible choices," I said finally, "but for enjoying the suffering you caused." I lit the gasoline trail and walked away as flames engulfed the building. Their screams echoed across the empty mountain landscape, but I felt only profound satisfaction. Justice was finally being served. Allison had wanted to fake her death and leave me to suffer. Instead, she had created the perfect conditions for her actual death, with no witnesses and no evidence connecting me to their demise. The news of the ranger station fire reached Millbrook 3 days later. It's buried as a minor story about an electrical malfunction at an abandoned facility. 2 bodies had been discovered, but identification would take weeks due to fire damage. Detective Sarah Chen called that afternoon with news I had been expecting. "Mr. Sterling, I'm afraid we found evidence of your fiancé's accident at Eagle's Peak. Blood, torn clothing, and her hiking boot in a ravine. We're classifying this as a presumed fatality." I performed my grief perfectly, responding with shocked devastation. The search continued for 2 weeks. finding exactly what Allison had planted, enough evidence to confirm a tragic accident, but no body to examine for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, investigators concluded the ranger station fire was caused by faulty electrical wiring. The two victims were eventually identified as Allison Fox and Victor Prescott. The timing discrepancy was explained as a survivor seeking shelter after her hiking accident, where she encountered Victor and both perished in the unfortunate blaze. It was a plausible narrative that satisfied all requirements for closing both cases. Allison's memorial service was held at St. Augustine Cathedral, where we would have been married. I played the devastated fiancé with consummate skill, accepting condolences and sharing carefully rehearsed memories. The financial transformation was immediate. Without Allison's deception saddling me with debt, wedding vendors offered reasonable cancellation terms. Funeral costs were covered by insurance. Most importantly, as her legal beneficiary, I inherited the $800,000 she had stolen and hidden under her false identity. Morrison and Associates promoted me to senior engineer with a substantial salary increase. I purchased a beautiful house in Millbrook's most exclusive neighborhood using her stolen money, the same money meant to finance her new life with Victor. A year later, Dr. Martinez visited, clearly terrified about his role in providing false medical documents. I assured him that any medical professional involved in such fraud would face serious consequences, and he never contacted me again. 2 years after Eagles Peak, my life was transformed. I became a partner at Morrison and Associates, featured in lifestyle magazines, respected in the community. I even began dating again, women drawn to my romantic tragedy and emotional maturity. On the 3rd anniversary, I held a memorial gathering at my house. As guests toasted Allison's memory, I looked directly at her expensive urn and offered my own tribute to Allison, who taught me that some people will do anything to get what they want, and who learned, too late, that some consequences are permanent. Night, alone in my beautiful home purchased with her stolen money, I reflected on perfect justice. Allison had gotten exactly what she wanted: permanent escape from our marriage and ultimate freedom from all concerns. She had just achieved it more finally than originally planned. The naive Leo Sterling was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that justice sometimes requires personal action. I kept her ashes not as a shrine to lost love, but as a reminder of what happens to people who mistake kindness for weakness. Allison Fox was dead. Leo Sterling was free. And the universe was finally in balance. 5 years have passed since that autumn day at Eagles Peak, and my life has exceeded every dream I once shared with Allison Fox, standing on the marble balcony of my penthouse,
I love backflips,
overlooking Millbrook's skyline. I sip morning coffee from a cup that costs more than most people's weekly salary. Morrison and Associates is now Sterling and Associates. After I successfully bought out my former partners using the investment portfolio I built with Allison's stolen money, the company has expanded to 3 cities, and I'm considered one of the most successful engineering entrepreneurs in the region. My wife, Dr. Elena Vasquez, emerges from our bedroom wearing the silk robe I bought her in Paris last month. She's a brilliant neurosurgeon, kind and genuine in ways Allison never was. Alina knows about my tragic first love, the devoted fiancé who died in that terrible hiking accident, and she often tells me how much she admires my capacity for healing and opening my heart again. "Good morning, darling," she says, kissing my cheek. "Don't forget, we're having dinner with the Prescotts tonight." I smile at the irony. The Prescotts are Victor's distant relatives who moved to Millbrook 2 years ago. They have no idea that I'm the man responsible for their cousin's disappearance. They've become close friends, who often praise my business acumen and moral character. "Of course," I reply. "I'm looking forward to it." Alina heads to the shower, while I return to my coffee and my view. In the distance, I can see Eagles Peak rising above the morning mist. Somewhere on that mountain is a small memorial plaque that the city installed to honor Allison Fox, beloved daughter and fiancés lost too soon. I funded that memorial myself, presenting it as a gesture of love and remembrance. The inscription includes a quote I personally selected: She found exactly what she was looking for. The irony is perfect. Visitors assume it's a romantic tribute to a life cut short, only I know it's a statement of absolute truth. Allison Fox wanted to escape our marriage by faking her death. She found exactly that, just more permanently. Then planned on my desk sits a small silver frame containing our engagement photo. Elena thinks I keep it as a touching tribute to lost love. In reality, it's a daily reminder of the most important lesson I've ever learned. Never underestimate someone you've wronged. My phone buzzes with a text from my assistant, Mr. Sterling.
Pass.
The Henderson project is ahead of schedule and under budget. Congratulations on another success. I built this empire with blood money. I've never slept better. The naive Leo Sterling died with Allison Fox in that ranger station. The man who rose from those ashes understands that justice isn't always served by courts and laws. Sometimes it requires personal action. Sometimes the only way to balance the scales is to become exactly what your enemies never expected. Someone capable of playing their game better than they ever could. Allison wanted to destroy an innocent man and walk away to a life of luxury. Instead, she created a predator who used her own weapons against her with surgical precision. I raised my coffee cup toward Eagle's Peak, offering one final toast to the woman who made everything possible. Thank you, Allison, for teaching me that mercy is optional, but justice is forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.